Krystle Ortiz was in her 20s and Hilda Santiago in her 30s when the two women first met in the Bronx, where they both lived. Despite their difference in age, the women seemed to hit it off quickly. One might say that the women bonded over two things: their sheer love for their children, seeing as they both were single mothers to young kids, and their love for a drug commonly abused in those parts of town, encyclidine, or what's better known as PCP. "All my friends smoke," Krystle would later tell a reporter about the drug, so she didn't think much of it, and Hilda divulged to her that she had a bit of a habit. Actually, that had already become more than clear when Krystle had managed to hook Hilda up with a job at the bar in Queens where she herself worked. Hilda had shown up for her first day of work high and had been fired on the spot. Krystle, although seemingly the more responsible of the two in spite of being younger, would admit to having a little habit of her own just up until recently. "This all came to an abrupt stop," she said, "one day not long ago when investigators from the Administration for Children's Services had come to her apartment inquiring about her 6-year-old daughter. This," Krystle swore, "had been enough to spook her into quitting, but the now 26-year-old still agreed to accompany her 38-year-old friend, whom she endearingly had grown to refer to as her aunt, on a trip to Upper Manhattan that the two of them had made many times before. Hilda's intention was to cop some dust, as they referred to buying PCP. And considering the sketchiness of the whole thing, Krystle would tell interviewers that she had tagged along to make sure that her friend would be safe. That morning, the two ladies left their respective Bronx apartments and hopped onto the number 4 train downtown to the number 6 train, which would leave them close to their first destination, which was, believe it or not, church. It was a cold day in New York, and the women had come prepared for it. Hilda herself had on 2 overcoats and a hat that Krystle had lent her. The hat was a youthful pink color and it had tassels dangling down from the ear flaps. It was also visibly too large as it kept sliding down, but Hilda didn't seem to mind just as long as it did the job. As the two women slid into a pew at the Roman Catholic Church of St. Paul in East Harlem, neither of them had the slightest notion that they were just about at the start of what would be the final hour of Hilda Santiago's life. In between masses, they practically had the place to themselves. They took a few moments to dip their rosaries in holy water, say their prayers, and light a candle before heading back out. They then proceeded to catch a cab to their next location, a short but intolerably cold distance away, at 1780 Madison Avenue. Knowing exactly where to go to score a cheap high, Krystle and her aunt, Hilda, walk up to a courtyard nestled between 2 housing complexes, where it's said that sometimes hundreds of customers come by each day to buy drugs from an enclosed area that they called the Pit. There at the Pit, among other things, for only $10, a person could buy a bag of crushed mint leaves that had been soaked in PCP. And just for the record, although more commonly mixed with pot or even just plain tobacco, this is not altogether an unusual way to use this particular substance. As usual, despite the blistery weather, there's a line outside the building. All 10+ individuals there waiting to buy drugs. Occasionally a lookout comes around to wag a finger and angrily warn them that, quote-unquote, "you're making the place hot." According to Krystle, there's no one type of person you can expect to find waiting at the Pit. She herself would go on to describe the element as ladies from church, teenagers, grown-ups, adding that you see people with canes, a lot of men that do construction, clean cut, nice job, a head on your shoulders. Krystle would also describe the experience upon entering the building. Quote, "You go down a little lobby, and you go to a second door, and there's a man there, and they serve you," end quote. Having been there so many times before, both her and Hilda have gotten to know the entire entourage fairly well, albeit only by their nicknames. There are guys called Mickey and Q and Skeet. There's Shy, E, C, and plenty of others. Hilda buys a bag, and then they're off to brave the freezing cold weather again. They make it no more than a block away before ducking for cover inside a 58 East 117th Street apartment building. It was just so cold, Krystle later recalls. As for Hilda, she seeks more than just shelter from the elements. In other words, she isn't planning to try and make the long and tiresome trip back home sober. So the women keep their eyes on the lookout for a good place to smoke. They decide to hop onto the elevator and ride it 5 stories up to the building's top floor. Hilda decides that the seemingly empty hallway is as good a place as any, so she pulls out her bag. She asks Krystle to borrow a lighter, and Krystle is quick to deliver. It's a brand new lighter she's never used before, and on brand new lighters, sometimes the flame is set too high. This may be important to know later on. Krystle describes a PCP high as unpredictable, quote-unquote, at best. Quote, "It's a high that numbs your head. It makes you stuck. It makes you drool," end quote. "Somebody I knew threw themselves off a roof," she recalls, adding the memory of seeing her friends sometimes fall flat down on their faces. Inside the warmth of the apartment building hallway, Hilda starts to puff away at her purchase. And at some point, for whatever reason, presumably as the PCP is starting to work its magic, Hilda's oversized hat slips yet again and one of the tassels manages to catch on fire. Krystle describes the ordeal by stating that everything just went whoosh. All I saw was yellow and red flames. I tried to put it out. Only, unlike Hilda, who had been rendered immune to the pain of being burned alive thanks to the drug, Krystle attests to having to step back at one point, seeing that she felt as if her hands were burning. On the other hand, Hilda, who had initially let out a scream, quickly grew silent. Presumably the PCP was in full effect because it appears she had stopped reacting. Krystle, who had the misfortune of witnessing the entire accident, states, "I couldn't hear her scream anymore. She was so high that she was not doing anything. She was just standing there." Just standing there and staring as the fire burned so hot that it soon would separate her flesh from her bone and cause her eventually to collapse. Let's pause for just a split second here. Death by fire is considered pretty universally to be one of the worst possible ways to die. It's a slow and excruciatingly painful death that most people wouldn't wish upon their worst enemy. But Krystle would swear, when later interrogated by the police, that Hilda had no reaction to the flames, even as they eroded away at her flesh and beyond. It probably goes without saying that by the time first responders would arrive on scene, Hilda was far beyond any help. She had in essence stood there and burned to death. Krystle, Hilda's best partner in crime, was quote-unquote slightly burned from her efforts to put her friend out, but she was slapped with a trespassing charge nonetheless. Furthermore, firefighters had told Krystle that, quote, "I could have taken off my coat and rolled her on the floor," end quote, except that Krystle quickly points out that when in the moment, quote unquote, "you just don't think like that." It could be said that the one good thing to come out of this was that Hilda's death helped to lead investigators to a massive drug ring that was led by two brothers, of which Hilda was a regular customer, and from whom she had purchased the cheap bag of PCP that very day. The drug ring that resulted in the arrests of 35 individuals is said to have sold thousands of bags of PCP per day and raked in $1 million in profit per year. Operation Kings of Dust, as the investigation had been called, had been under investigation for 15 months. When Krystle heard about the indictment, she said she recognized many of the names, but she also would go on to assert that even in the face of such a large bust, trust me, it's still going to be around. In the aftermath of the horrific incident, and not to mention the loss of a friend so close that she might as well have been family, should Krystle ever find herself around the St. Paul's Church in Harlem, she now makes sure she stops in not only to go about her regular routine, but to light a candle for Hilda as well. That's going to do it for this installment. Please don't forget to leave a like if you enjoyed the content and subscribe to the channel if you want more true stories of a dark and twisted nature. Hit that notification bell as well, and as always, feel free to leave a comment below. Thank you all for stopping by, and I hope to see you back next time.